out of our own boat. And I'm glad that you're here. Once again, Matthew chapter 14 is where we are going to be, so we want to encourage you, if you will, to go ahead and to turn over there. And as you do that, I want to share some announcements, just really quick. There's a bunch of sign-up lists on the back. If you haven't signed up, please do. There's a sign-up list for volunteer effort called Walk the Walk. There is a leadership seminar that's coming up at Heritage Christian University on March 16th. If you would sign up, if you want to go to that, please sign that form. We're going to get some registration for that event. The event is free up there. They're going to provide lunch as well, so we want to encourage you, if you would like to go up, be part of that leadership event, to go ahead and do that. Beside that list is something coming up in April. It's a marriage retreat weekend. We want to encourage you to sign up for that if you would like. And on the other side of that is the time to meet with the elders, and we would appreciate that, to have that opportunity to talk with you and to share some things together. But let's get into our lesson this morning from Matthew chapter 14. The verse that I want you to remember is this. If you don't remember any other verse this morning, I want you to remember this verse. It says, "So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water, and he came to Jesus." This, to me, is an absolutely amazing account. One of the reasons it's amazing to me is because I'm going to be honest with you. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I probably wouldn't have gotten out of the boat. One reason is I don't fear a lot of things in life. I don't have a fear of a lot of things. I have a fear of drowning. That's my number one fear of life, because it's an absolute loss of control. You can't do anything, and to me it's an absolutely horrible death, and I don't like it. I'll be the first one to go into the ocean and to swim out as far as I can, and to float on my back. But the whole time I think to myself, it's probably not going to turn out well. So I don't know if I would have gotten out of the boat. I like to think no. My first venture in life of swimming on my own is when we were all on a whitewater raft, and we were fishing in a river in West Virginia called the Greenbrier River. And as we're fishing there, one of the people in the boat says, "Hey, Chris, can you swim?" I said, "Yeah, I think I can swim." And they said, "Good." And they pushed me out of the boat. I'm no longer friends with them, but they're still family. So we're kind of stuck together. But I laugh about that because that's, and somebody says, "Well, that's where it started." No, it didn't start there. I can probably tell you where my fear of water started. I don't know if I would have gotten out of the boat. I don't know if I would have said, "Lord, if that's you, bid me to come out to you." I think I would have said, "Lord, if that's you, come over here. Come to me a little bit. I don't really want to go out there." But the interesting thing is we give Peter a little bit of grief for this, right? We give Peter some grief because we say to ourselves, Peter got out of the boat, but we know what happened, right? We know that he got so close to Jesus that he started to sink because he noticed everything around him. And as he started to sink, Jesus reached out and grabbed Peter. That's how close. That's how close that he was. He was close enough to reach out, and he was close to grab him. Now, I want to redefine this word again. I want to go back to it. This is the same slide that you'll probably see over the next few Sundays, and it's about faithful commitment. We would say that Peter is committed to Jesus. Peter is the one in Matthew chapter 26. When Jesus says, "You're going to deny me," Peter says, "Nope, not me. I'm going to go with you until I die. If I have to die, I'm going to die. I am not going to deny you." And by the way, the end of that verse says all the disciples said the same thing. Every single one of them said that. But when we talk about faithful commitment, I want you to remember this, especially in the life of Peter. A faithful commitment has substance. It's got some evidence to it. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things believed. We know that. We know that there's assurance in that, is what some translations say in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1. So faith has some substance to it. It's got this evidence, but it's also got actions. In James chapter 2 and verse 14, it simply says that faith without works is dead. So if you have faith, if you've got belief, and it's got some substance to it, then you've got some things to follow. And as we look at Peter, we know that Peter had that. You go back to John chapter 1, the account of when the disciples of John the Baptist, they find out that Jesus is the Messiah. It's Andrew that goes and gets his brother Peter and says, "You've got to come and see the Messiah." So Peter gets up and leaves because that's who he's been looking for. I believe that Peter's been looking for Jesus his entire life. And when Andrew says, you've got to come and you've got to see him, he says, sounds great, let's go. And he goes over and he goes to see him, which kind of, as we read through the Bible, we get to the scene that's on the Sea of Galilee. It's said in John chapter 21, it's also called the Sea of Tiberias. What's very interesting is the Sea of Galilee is about 13 miles long. It's about 8 miles wide. But it's a very unique sea, and the reason is because of the position of it. We know that it's, as we would think about the Holy Lands in the book of maps in the back of our Bible, if you go and you look at Jerusalem and you go north to Nazareth and to Capernaum, and there's a mountain range that's there, there's going to be the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is about 680 feet below sea level. Now, that may not mean anything to you, but it sets the tone for the Sea of Galilee. Because the Sea of Galilee being 680 feet below sea level, one of the things is it's kind of warm down there. But it's surrounded by a mountain range. This mountain range, when the cold air would come off of that mountain range and it would blend with that weather that's there, I tried to figure out how to explain this as to how bad that storm would be. And this is the way I thought of it. James Spann would take off his coat and one suspender. That's the way I think you have to say it. Is James Spann would take it and he would say, okay, here's where it's going to be. Then he would probably tell you it's going to be 10 feet out in the sea with all of his GPS stuff. He'd tell you where it's going to be, right? But as that air would come off of there, as that cold air would come off and it would hit that warm wind, it would create waves on the Sea of Galilee, and some of those waves were 3 to 4 feet high. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. If we see waves 3 to 4 feet high on a lake, our minds tells us we're not going to go. I don't want to do that. It's not something that I want to get into a small fishing boat and that I want to go out. Fishing boats about 16, maybe 18 feet long. Some were 14. And the sides of that boat are lower than the bow and the stern, of course, because they had to pull the nets over. So now you have this boat that's rocking up and down on the Sea of Galilee as that perfect storm kind of raged. And notice what it says in Matthew chapter 14. It says, let's go back to verse 22 if we can for a moment. It says, immediately he made the disciples get into a boat. By the way, this is after Jesus has fed the 5,000. They've seen a pretty big miracle. And it says, immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went on the mountain to pray by himself. This is one of the times in Jesus' life, one of the 12, I believe, that we find in the Gospels. By the way, March 1st, we're going to read through the Gospels together. We're going to have a calendar out. We're going to put it out on Wednesday night. You'll be able to grab that. And it's March's challenge. We've had a February prayer challenge. And in March, we're going to have a Read Through the Gospels challenge. So you'll be able to see that. There'll be if for some reason you can't be here on Wednesday night, there's going to be it posted on our Facebook page and online. You'll be able to grab that. But to be able to read through the Gospels, you'll find out that at least 12 times Jesus withdraws himself, which means he gets away from everybody and he just spends some time alone. Many of those times are in prayer. This is one of those. It says he went on the mountain to pray by himself, and when he came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from land. It was beaten by the waves, and the wind was strong against them. It was that cold air moving down into the Sea of Galilee, and it was that stirring of the waves, that storm that was going to happen. And it says, verse 25, in the fourth watch of the night. It's late. They've been battling this storm for a while now. It says, in the fourth watch of the night, it says he came to them walking on the sea, but the disciples saw him walking on the sea, and they were terrified, and they said, for it's a ghost. Now, we can laugh at that a little bit, and we can go, that's kind of silly. But your boat's going up and down, and you look, and every time the boat goes up, you may catch a glimpse of somebody on the water. Just picture that for a moment. Boat's up and down. You catch a glimpse of what you think is somebody walking on the water. Now, I don't know how Jesus walked on the water. I don't know if he just went across the whole top of the water. I don't know. I don't know if he was going up and down with water. I don't know. But I know that he was walking on the water. Whether that's he was going from wave to wave, Or he was even gone in the depressions that the waves made. I don't know. But I knew, though, that they saw him. They saw something that they had never seen before, and they said, it's a ghost. It's a ghost. That's what we would say. We'd probably rub our eyes and we'd probably go, I'm getting motion sickness because I think I just saw somebody. And they said, it's a ghost. Now notice what happens next. I love this part, by the way. I love this account because of what happens next. They said, it's a ghost, and they cried out in fear. They were scared to death. But immediately Jesus spoke and says, take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. I've often wondered about this because we talk about in the Bible that the sheep will recognize the shepherd's voice because the shepherd spends so much time with the sheep. And Jesus says, my sheep will know my voice. Did they hear his voice? Did they hear that voice and they say, that's them. That's who it is. And it's Jesus. It's not a ghost, but instead it's Jesus. And notice what happens. Peter says to him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come out to you on the water. If it's you. What if it was a ghost? That's a pretty comedic scene when you think about it. It's a pretty jokester of a ghost, but we know it's Jesus. He says, Lord, if it's you, command me to come out there. And he said, come. So Peter got out of the boat, walked on water, and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. He began to sink, and he cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, and he said this, oh, you of little faith, why do you doubt? When they got out of the boat, or when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly, truly, you are the Son of God. Now, I want to ask a simple question for you this morning. And the simple question is this: why did Peter get out of the boat? I want to give you 3 reasons why I think Peter got out of the boat. The first one is Peter was crazy. I'm going to give that to you. That's human nature for us, that Peter was crazy. What's one reason that Peter probably got out? Well, Peter was the one who always said things, right? And we give Peter a lot of grief for that. We give him a lot of struggle because when he even says to Jesus, I'm not going to deny you. This is not going to happen. Jesus says, you will deny me. But Peter also was the one who said, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Peter was also the one that when Malchus came with all of those soldiers, Peter grabbed his sword and swung, I truly believe, at Malchus's head, not his ear. Because if you think about it, it's hard to take out a sword and to swing at somebody and just get their ear, especially if you're a fisherman, because you don't have to fight fish with a sword. You're not well versed in that. So I believe he swung in his head. Malchus just happened to be quick. And he got his ear off. Jesus, of course, put the ear back on. But what's very, very fascinating about this is Peter had this zealousness to him. And Peter, you could say Peter was probably crazy. Either that or Peter was very, very brave. I mean, would you have stepped out of that boat? You know, the church answer is absolutely. The real answer is probably not. Probably not if the boat's going up and down. You'd be the one going, go, Peter, go. You've gotten us in enough trouble. Just keep going, man. Just you go, and let's see what happens, Peter. You probably would have sat back, right? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. The other disciples did. Peter just happened to get out of the boat. You know what I think is the real reason? I think there's a reason sometimes that we don't think about. We know it. We know the reason that Peter truly got out of the boat. I think we know the reason. And I think the reason is so simple that it boggles our minds. I think that Peter just wanted to see Jesus. That's really what I think it is. Lord, if that's you, bid me to come out to you. I don't think that Peter thought for a second, hey, I'm going to see the wind and the waves and I'm going to sink. I don't think he thought for a second that he was going to sink. I think that Peter thought, now I'm saying I think a lot here, but that he just wanted to see Jesus. I'm pretty sure that's probably what Peter wanted to do, is he just wanted to see Jesus. So when you think about it for a second, we know that Peter had faith. Because his faith was on Jesus. He's getting ready, and he did. He took a step that many people are not going to take, all because he wanted to see Jesus. So just could it be as we talk about in these 12 weeks, about 12 weeks of commitment for our congregational plan this year, for the first 12 weeks, was it that Peter had what I'm going to call a crazy faith? Did Peter have a crazy faith? Did Peter have a faith that made him go out of his comfort zone into what he needed to do? Remember what Peter's job was. Peter was a fisherman. Let your mind wander for a second and ask yourself, do you ever think that Peter knew some people that drowned in storms? That drowned because their boat flipped over? That drowned in that Sea of Galilee? But yet, what did Peter see? Just before they go walking on the Sea of Galilee, or Peter does with Jesus, they just saw the feeding of the 5,000. And there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions about the feeding of the 5,000. How did it happen? I don't know. Only thing I know is they reached in the basket and there came more fish and bread. It's actually more than 5,000 if we think about it. But anyway, that's a whole different account, whole different story. Well, where did all of that come from? And he's able to do this, and they take up these basket loads over. Peter knew something about Jesus. Peter knew that he'd seen the miracles of Jesus, so he knew what Jesus could do. Peter had a crazy faith. He really did. When I say crazy, I'm not talking he wasn't right mentally. I'm saying he was right mentally, but his faith reached out beyond societal norms. What happens when you see somebody that's happier than they should be in this life? What do you call them? Crazy. That person's crazy. Why? They're way too happy. Well, that person's crazy. Why? They're way too excited about life. Well, that person's crazy. Really? Why are they crazy? I can't believe that they did that. That doesn't make any sense. And sometimes when we step back and we take a look at it, we go, that's crazy faith. It's crazy faith to go out and to share the gospel with somebody. That's crazy. Because the world says you just got to leave everybody alone. But I truly believe that Peter had some crazy faith. Or could it be that Peter had a committed faith? That his faith had the evidence that Jesus had done all of these things, had all the evidence, and now he says, if it's you, Lord, bid me to come out to you. Who does Peter know in this world that's going to take complete care of him? Jesus. Who does Peter know that he needs to be close to? Jesus. How does he know that? He's seen the works. He's walked with him. He's talked with him. He's been rebuked by him. But Peter knows the one that he has to go to. He knows the one with the words of life. So I think in the end, Peter just wanted to see Jesus. Just wanted to see Jesus. In fact, let me ask you to do this. Let me ask you to turn over to John chapter 21. I want to share with you something that I think that we see, because we've got evidence in the Bible of Peter. We've got evidence of Peter doing some really, really crazy things and some things that don't make sense. In John chapter 21, it's one of these unique moments in Peter's life, and I think it boils down to this. Peter just wanted to see Jesus. That's what he wanted to do. He was going to do whatever it took to see Jesus. In fact, in John chapter 21, I want you to notice this. It says, John chapter 21, verse 1, after Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, Sea of Galilee, he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two of the other of his disciples were together. So you've got this group of disciples who's followed Jesus, and they're together. They're just hanging out, we would say. So look what Simon Peter does. He says, I'm going to go fishing. That's probably something he did his entire life. It's probably very comfortable to him. But he goes fishing. It says they said, we'll go with you. So they went and they got into a boat, but at that night, they caught nothing. And just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet his disciples did not know who he was. So Jesus is a great way off. In fact, jump on down just for a moment to verse 8. I know I left you there at verse 4, but jump over to verse 8. And it says, the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fishes, for they were not far from land, but a couple hundred yards off. They're off the shore a little bit, so they don't know who Jesus is. They don't see him at this point. Because before, in John chapter 19, chapter 20, he appeared to Thomas. Then we know that there's a break of the occasion. Jesus is not with them, so they go fishing. So Jesus shows up on daybreak at shore, and he says to them, verse 5, yells out to them, children, do you have any fish? By the way, notice that question. Do you have any fish? They answered in him, and they said, no. They're still far off from shore. This is probably a little bit of a yelling match, even though you could probably hear just by speaking. He says, cast the nets to the right side of the boat, and you'll find some. They don't know who Jesus is. But they take advice. They take advice from somebody that's on the shore. So it says they did, and they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of the fish. They cast their nets over. They give it a little bit of time, and they pull those nets back up, and they can't do it. Now, I want you who remember who was there. Look in verse 2. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, and two other disciples. They've got a group there, and they cannot pull these fish in. Then it says, verse 7, that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. That's John. John looks at Peter, and he says, it's the Lord. Now, I want you to notice the next part of this verse. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea. That's crazy faith. It's the Lord. So he just dumps over the sides of the boat. By the way, he leaves everybody else. Did you notice that? Why does he leave everybody else? Because it's Peter the apostle. That's why. And he leaves everybody else. He threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far off from land, about 100 yards off. So they're still getting the fish in. Peter jumps into the water. Why? Because he wants to see Jesus. Not to see him from a distance. He wants to see him face to face. And he jumps in the water, and you think to yourself, that's crazy. No, you know what that is? That's passionate desire. That's what that is. That's passionate desire. When you want something, you're going to go get it no matter what it's going to take. You're going to use that effort, and that's what Peter does. And notice verse 9. When they got out on land, notice this. Notice sometimes the details are so amazing in the Bible. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish already laid out on it and with bread. What was already on the fire? Fish. And he had some bread. Then they talk about the fish. But notice what Peter did. Peter got out of the boat again, didn't he? And it wasn't a bad day. It was just above daybreak. He was tired. He was exhausted. He just probably didn't want to fish any longer. And what's he do? He jumps out of the boat and he goes to see Jesus. I really think that Peter was so committed to Jesus that he just wanted to be around him. That's why I think that verse is so important. I asked you to remember. So Peter got out of the boat and he walked on water and he came to Jesus. Whether you think it's a crazy faith, whether it's a committed faith, we will all agree Peter wanted to be near Jesus. So here's the question to you this morning. Are you going to get out of the boat? Are you going to get out of the boat? And what I mean by that is we're not in the midst of a storm right now. Things seem to be going pretty good. We could probably find all the negatives, as we mentioned before. We can find all the excuses. We can find all the reasons. But are you going to get out of the boat? And here's why. Let me share with you a little bit of why you need to get out of the boat. And I'll tell you about what the boat is in a second. You need to get out of the boat because somebody got out of the boat for you. Let me say that again. You need to get out of the boat because somebody got out of the boat for you. Here's what I mean by the boat. In the boat, it's pretty comfortable. You don't have to worry about too much if you're in the boat because the boat is going to float. And everybody's kind of in the boat. And everybody kind of wants to be in the boat. But it's going to take a crazy faith. It's going to take a committed faith to step out of that boat and to go near Jesus. It's going to take a crazy faith to step out and say, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this. Let me give you a crazy example. The studies have been clear since about the early 1970s. In the early 1970s, studies began to be taken, and it asked people, why do you go to church where you go to church? 86 to about 92% of people go to the church that they go to because somebody invited them. That's it. It didn't say somebody had a Bible study with them, somebody taught them the Greek and the Hebrew. It didn't say somebody, kidnapped them and took them. It said somebody invited them. That's what it says. That's what every study has said. The large majority, the high majority, is that somebody invited them. 15% of people, on an average throughout the 70s, 15% of people drove by and saw the church sign. What's that say? My favorite is about the preacher. About 5 to 8% of people came because of the preacher. What's that say? Well, I know what you're thinking. Sign's more valuable than the preacher. I'll take it. But the other thing is, you got to get out of the boat. You got to get out of the boat and you got to say to somebody, hey, I want you to come to church, but I don't know you. Doesn't matter. I want you to come. I want you to be here because it's about those relationships. But somebody got out of the boat in your life at some point and invited you to church. For me, I don't know the name of the person, but I know the situation. Somebody invited my great uncle. They invited my great uncle to come to church. And my great uncle went. What my great uncle did is when my great uncle obeyed the gospel, guess what he did? He went when he found Jesus, and he went to his brothers and sister, and he said, guess what? You got to come to church with me. And guess what a lot of them said? I don't want to go to church with you. And he said, that's fine, but I'm going to keep asking. And finally, he broke through to my grandparents. And when he broke through to my grandparents came. Now, my grandfather didn't come, but every time my uncle saw him, he would come to him and he would say, hey, when are you going to go to church? You need to go to church with me. You need to go do that. My grandfather obeyed the gospel. And it was so great to see my grandfather about 6 months before he passed away in a hospital telling the nurse that she needed to come to church. I laughed because I wasn't even in the room, and the nurse walked out and she goes, is that your grandfather? She said, yeah. She said, I love him. I said, good. She said, you know what he says every time he sees me? I said, does he tell you to come to church? I said, yeah. I said, so you know what? She goes, I know. I need to come to church. Now, he wasn't taking him to a building. He was taking him to Jesus. But see, we all have those stories, right? Each and every one of us have somebody that stepped out of the boat for us. But here's what we think sometimes. I don't know if I can step out of the boat. I just don't know. I don't know if I could do that. And your stepping out of the boat may not be to go evangelize the whole world. Your stepping out of the boat may just very simply be that you need to do something small for somebody else. But we have to realize this. You can step out of the boat. You can. And I'm going to give you a couple reasons this morning why I believe that you can step out of the boat. We'll talk about them when we get into March. But what's very fascinating about this is we've already stepped out of the boat in some other things, right? We do some things that we did not really want to do at first because we felt they were uncomfortable. We felt that we couldn't do it. We felt that we just weren't going to make it. And in fact, we encourage others the same. We say, you know what, you can do this. We tell them to believe in the little engine that could. Remember that little engine that could? I think I can, 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 I think I can. And that engine takes off and he starts up that hill and all the other engines were saying, you can't do it. And he kept saying, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And he got to the top of the hill and guess what he did? He went over the top of the hill. And he went down the other side and the others were still, he did it. We can't believe it. We told him he couldn't do it. Do you know why? Because this is where it starts. Why do you think the Bible spends so much time talking about our mind? Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, if any of these things are noble, are righteous, are excellent, then you meditate. You think deeply upon these things. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 2, set your mind on things above, not on things of this earth. Because when we take the transformation of our minds, A verse that we've mentioned so much since the beginning of the year. Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Remember, do not be conformed to this world. It's verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world. Be transformed by what? The renewing of your mind, that you may prove. That means once you change it up here, you start to step out of the boat a little bit. And here's what I want you to consider over the next couple weeks. I want you to consider these questions. First of all, if you want to step out on the boat, and I think that you can do it, you got to ask yourself, what are your talents? What have you been given by God? What have you been given? And the reason I say that is every one of us, I truly believe, we are designed by an awesome creator, and we have talents and we have abilities. And every single person's here are different. They're different. I know of an individual in my life, he's not going to go out and he's not going to sit down and have a Bible study with somebody. He's not just going to sit there and have a Bible study. But if you get him on a basketball court, he'll talk all day about Jesus. Somebody comes in and somebody misses a shot and he goes, hey, don't worry, it's going to be okay, it's going to be all right. And he gives them a little pat and they keep playing, and somebody finally says, what's going on with you? He says, man, this is just the game. Just part of life. And they say, what? We just lost. He's like, it's okay, don't worry about it. So people start to ask questions, right? Because what's Peter say? When somebody asks you concerning the hope that's in you, what's the hope? The hope is that confident expectation that does not rely on this earth. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, they start to ask questions, and he gets to pull them in a little bit. He gets to say, you know what? If you believe what I believe, and they say, what do you believe? There's the open door. He'll walk down the court and he'll just talk with people. And he'll tell them on the court. But if you ask him, hey, we're going to sit down at the Bible study, he goes, that one-on-one thing's not going to work. Get me out in public. I know people, the one-on-one thing works. I know people who've designed Bible class curriculum so that's not bought from somebody else who doesn't know what a local congregation has. Doesn't know the needs of the local congregation, where we don't put everybody in the same slots. Instead, it's this person we know is maybe struggling with this, so let's help these people out. And they designed a Bible class curriculum based upon those. I know people, and it used to be a really interesting thing for congregations. Some congregations used to reach out with nurses and medical professionals. They have a blood pressure clinic. Just, hey, come in, we're just going to check your blood pressure, your pulse, make sure everything's okay, and you can have a cup of coffee with us, good to go. I know people that work behind the scenes that you don't even know. And I'm not going to point those people out because I don't want to embarrass them. But you ever think about this? You ever see the bulletin boards in the back? If you haven't seen them, you need to go see them. Bulletin boards are getting done. You'll come in one week and all of a sudden you'll look and you'll go, who did that? Well, they did it when you weren't here. They snuck in. These sneaky Christians coming in changing bulletin boards. How do you think things get organized and put together in the building? Why do the lights stay on? How does the parking lot get striped? How does all that begin to happen? How do you see some changes, and you're going to see more changes around the building? Why? Because there's people, and they're not going to be out front, and they're not going to be the people leading the charge, but they are going to be the people who stepped out of the boat and said, I don't think I can do this, but they do. In fact, if you need another thing to think about how we're using everything that God has given us, and ask your question this: why do you have the talents that you have? Why do you have the abilities that you have? I don't think it was by accident. I think it was by design. Some of you have the greatest ability to cook food for somebody. And you may not do anything else, but when you cook food, it changes people. And what I mean by that is a lot of people ask questions. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? Well, the Bible just says that we're to treat others as we want to be treated. That's why we would do that. Some of you have the greatest ability just to send a card. Just to send a card to somebody. And you think this really doesn't matter. Those things are what changes people's lives. It's not the big events. It's going to be the constant communication, the constant relationships. Because once you decide to yourself, what are my abilities? Am I using my abilities? And do you use them? How are you putting those into practice? The Bible specifically tells us to use our abilities. And here's why. I want you to write down this scripture. We'll come back and we'll look at it in a couple weeks. The scripture is Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through verse 16. That passage of scripture says that abilities were given to some for the equipping of the saints for the work of the ministry. Not for the equipping of the saints to sit in the pew. It's not what that says. The word ministry is the word of service. So the equipping of the saints for the work of service, for the ability to get out, for the ability to use those. So my question to you comes down to the very last one that's here. Where are you going to use your abilities? Is it going to be inside of this building? Maybe there's something here that you can do. Maybe there's something outside of this that you can do. But where are you going to use your abilities? Because when we look at Peter, Peter stepped out of the boat, and we talk a lot about Peter's, we would almost say, lack of faith, right? Because he says, oh, why have you of little faith? Jesus never said he didn't have any faith. He just calls his faith at that point, when he starts to sink and he reaches out to Jesus, he says it's little. But this is the same guy who stepped out of the boat. We're not going to be perfect, but are we willing to step out of the boat, even if it is just to see Jesus? So the last question that I want to share with you is this. What type of commitment do you have? We've mentioned this before. This is a slide that you've seen, and you're going to see it again. What kind of commitment do you have? Do you have an attendance commitment? Are you comfortable with where you're at? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being comfortable as to where you're at and exactly where you are in life. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that God has left us with talents and abilities and expects us to use them. In Matthew chapter 25, there's the parable of the talents and its money. He gave that money based on that servant's ability. That's why you have 5, 2, and 1. At the end of the life of 5 and 2, the master says, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. Now they're going to receive much. To the one talent man, he says, you should have done something with it. I think that's about us, and I think that's about our commitment, and I think that's about exactly where we are within our lives, that we've been given these things by God. But do you have an attendance commitment? Do you have a feeling commitment? Well, I feel like I would have gotten out of the boat. I don't know. And I'll say that. I don't know. Because I'm not sure that Peter said, hey, I feel like I can get out of the boat. But do you have a faithful commitment? Or the last one is this, the change of life, the transformation is this. Do you have a moving commitment? There is story after story after story, or account after account after account in the Bible of crazy faith. We've looked at David's crazy faith in battling Goliath, because he had the evidence that God was there. We look at Abram. When Abram was asked to move because God had asked him to, not because God said, hey, here's the Google GPS map of where you're going. He says, no, you're going to move, and you start traveling, and when you get there, I'll tell you. That relationship with God, that's crazy faith. When he was going to sacrifice Isaac, that's crazy faith. It's committed faith. But we think it's crazy because it's out of the box of just show up for church. We look at Peter and we say, Peter literally got out of the boat because he knew that he could, because he just wanted to see Jesus. So my ultimate question to you this morning is this. Are you willing to get out of the boat of comfort so that you can see Jesus? The Bible says to present our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable, which is our spiritual worship. But don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your minds, that you may prove what is good and acceptable in the perfect will of God. If we want to be transformed, then we need to be fully committed, and fully committed so much that we're willing to step out of the boat. This morning, if you need prayers of the church, we're here for you. If you need help in your spiritual life, we'll pray with you and for you. If you need to obey the gospel, we're here as well. But we're asking you to do this. We're asking you to make a commitment to Christ.